Hi, good evening, everyone. So, welcome to the exercise lecture for chapter 10. So, just before anything else, wanted to get a quick discussion lang about like the next few days. So, basically, tapos nyo na yung exercises for property plant equipment. So, this Monday, expect that there will be a quiz on PPE with regards to the coverage, based on the discussion that I uploaded this week and also about the exercises. So for PPE, I think by now, based on the exercises, you can see tatlo lang naman talaga yung babantayan natin, right? So number one would be being an expert at classification. So parang understanding how do you classify terms based on ano ba siya? Land improvement, building equipment, in which of the costs should you capitalize or outright expense? The second thing that you have to master would be depreciation. So hopefully, before you listen to how it's solved and actually looking at the answer key, please, super important that you really understand how you were able to arrive with this. So wag kayo mahiya if something is not clear when it comes to mga depreciation questions. Feel free to comment on the thread natin sa Facebook community so that yun yung pinaka madali ko kasi makikita over the weekend. If you scheduled or if you want to schedule a consultation just so that we can go through other exercises together, kindly message na rin on the Facebook group kasi I don't think I will be able to check the email promptly over the weekend. And then the last would be disposals. So in disposals, it's kind of tricky because it's a compound journal entry, but I think once you get the hang of it, particularly on like the way you need to write the journal entry in the proper order, it should be a giveaway. So parang dapat yun yung pangpataas nyo ng points when it comes to short problems, be it in your quizzes or your exams, right? So without further ado, I'll just quickly go through the exercises that we gave this week. Aside from this, I'm gonna be uploading the answer key. So kung mas madali kayong mag-intindi ng Excel, then please do so. Another thing I will stress, probably
Something went wrong. Please try again.
so in terms of like the quiz, I think given the time pressure, some of you will probably be using Excel in terms of formatting. But again, like what I've mentioned, ang tip ko sa inyo is please be an expert muna at handwritten and then use Excel as a way to double check, right? Para lang masanay kayo for your finals, right? So, if everything's clear, then let's go through our PPE exercises, right? So, before anything else, let's just have a quick walkthrough. So again, number one that we have to master would be initial recognition or classifying our PPE. And in terms of PPE, there are four major types: our land improvements, buildings, and equipment. So in the next few slides, you can see that what are the different things that should be included in terms of determining ano ba yung cost of your land improvement, your buildings, and your equipment, right? But in essence, for PPE, it should be initially recognized at what? At cost, at the point of purchase. Now, nagkakaroon lang tayo ng difficulty is that yung cost will be comprised of a lot of different costs. So dapat each specific type of PPE, you're familiar when it comes to ano yung mga certain terms associated with it. So for example, for land, usually it's gonna be the purchase price, the stamp tax, escrow, real estate commission, taxes in arrears. Pero make sure na yung taxes na to, these are accrued property taxes, not taxes after you bought it. Kasi pag if it's a regularly or something that's occurring yearly, then hindi mo na i-capitalize. If it was tax for the land, so basically nabili mo na, pero after 1 year, tinax ka ulit, that tax is not capitalizable. That tax is outright expense. I think you were able to see that in one of the exercises that we'll be discussing. Aside from this, ano ba yung mga common terms associated to land? Grading, leveling, landfill, clearing of trees, net, selling anything that you got from clearing of the trees, land survey, and assessment. Sa assessment, usually it's on land. Pero you have to be careful because the assessment will pertain to a specific thing. If it's special assessment on the land, then it's land. But if it's special assessment on a land improvement, then that should be land improvement. So again, this is something that you'll also see in the exercises later. Other things to note, so land does not depreciate. So if there's any PPE type that does not depreciate, it's gonna be land. Next, so let's move on to land improvement. So land improvements naman, ano difference na between land? Yung land improvements are physical, structural additions on top of your land or beneath it, whatever, right? So some examples would be fences, landscaping, sewage, pavements, etc., etc. Generally, anything that will involve other necessary costs to make sure that these structural additions are finalized for their intended use. Right? Straightforward. Next, building. So sa building, there are two. Either you purchase a building, right? So when you purchase a building, all of the necessary costs to put it into its purpose, like remodeling, replacing, or repairing the roof, wiring, plumbing, it's still capitalizable under building. And then if it's constructed, then there are even more terms, right? So borrowing costs, so pare, may interest expense ka. For that interest expense, you have to break it down. If a portion of it is related to borrowing costs or financing the project, only that portion should be capitalized. So for example, for the year, there was over 100,000 in interest expense, right? And then 70,000 of that 100,000 was for borrowing cost in order to finance your building. Therefore, yung 100,000 will be split. 30,000 will be outright expense for the interest expense of the year. And then 70,000, right? So 70,000 will be what? Capitalized to building, right? So others is like safety fence, temporary buildings, temporary quarters, and the like. And then lastly, sa equipment would be anything that you have to spend in order for it to arrive at its intended use. So pag insurance, kailangan during in transit. Kapag may dismantling, okay, capitalize. Safety rail, water device to cool, testing the unit, assembling, painting, freight charge, anything that you need to bring it and make sure na it's fully working should be capitalized to equipment. Then others would be outright expense, like motor vehicle registration, insurance after installation, or ordinary repairs. Aside from this, for equipment in general, you also have additional expenditure. So let's be careful. Every time there is an additional expenditure related to an equipment, like for example, oils and lubricants, right? You ask yourself, does it maintain or does it improve? If it only maintains the operating efficiency and useful life, these are all expensed, okay? All of them are expensed. If on the other hand, so kare oil, it only maintains, right? But kare nag-upgrade ka, bumilis yung software, or nag-upgrade ka, tumagal yung lifetime ng machine. If it improves, it should be capitalized, and therefore the journal entry will be debit PPE, credit cash, credit AP. So again, be careful about additional expenditures. And then finally, the last thing for this would be your land and building issue. But basically, if you bought in lump sum and the building is not usable and immediately demolished, all of it will be capitalized to land, right? So pati yung demolition cost, net salvage cost. But if it's usable, you prorate based on what? Again, how do you prorate? Based on fair value of the land and the building, right? So that was 10 full minutes of just literally parang speed running the concepts in terms of like classifying or the initial recognition of all of these PPE types. But like what I mentioned, basically, for you to master these concepts, the key here is to really answer a lot of exercises. And then from there, making sure na you learn from ano ba yung mga concepts na hindi kayo clear. Para pag lumabas siya in the future, in your quizzes, in practice, or even in exams, alam niyo na paano i-treat, right? So let's go to the first exercise, which is Peterson Enterprise. So basically, it listed down a bunch of terms, and then it's asking you, what would be the land improvement, and the building? And then, what are other things, right? So kung hindi siya among those three, it's probably an expense because it's a cost, right? So purchase of land, obviously, will fall under land. Land survey, obviously land. Fee for the search for the title of the land is related to land. Building permit, building. Temporary quarters, alam na natin yan, building. Payment to tenants of old building. So you want to use the building, may mga nakatirang tao, so in order for you to use it, you need to pay them to evacuate. And because it's a necessary cost for the building to be used for its intended purpose, that should be under building. Now, yung raising of old building. So yung raising of old building, basically giniba, right? So paano natin, saan natin yung i-capitalize? Sa land. Because the assumption here is that unusable siya, kaya siya giniba kaagad, right? Excavating basement sounds familiar because that's a building term. Special assessment tax for street project. Again, pag may assessment, you look at what is the tax for? It's for a street project. A street project is a land improvement, and therefore this should be a land improvement. Damage awarded for injury sustained in construction. So now you'd think, probably, dapat building yan because it's related to the construction. However, you should not capitalize a cost that could have been avoided. Kaya lang naman nagkaroon ng injury was because probably there was a liability on your part. So it doesn't make sense that you should treat that as an asset. Instead, that should be an expense, particularly wala ka pang insurance. So this 8,750 is an expense. Again, kasi walang insurance. Pag may insurance yan, ika-capitalize mo, right? Last three. Cost of construction, definitely building. Parking lot, land improvement. And then finally, landscaping, land improvement. So if you add everything together, you'll have 316,300 for land, 93,400 for land improvement, 2,672,650 for building, and then you have an expense of 8,750. So ang napansin nyo, hinighlight ko lahat ng hindi ko na-discuss. Raising old building, na-discuss ko na pero syempre iba kasi I used the term demolition. Special assessment tax, initially, I discussed this as land lang. Pero as you can see, pwede rin siyang land improvement. So ang new rule natin is if you see an assessment tax, you look at what the tax is levied on. If it's on land, then it's a land. If it's on street project, which is a land improvement, then it's land improvement. Pag may damage or may injury during construction, you don't capitalize. These are expense. So this is the final answer for Peter's enterprise, right? So very straightforward. So wag kayong matakot kung maraming terms, kung magaling kayong mag-classify or you really did a lot of exercises, then it should be straightforward. Next, let's take at the other example, right? So XYZ company was organized on January 1 and then marami siyang terms. The only difference here is that yung cost, it was classified as debit or credit, but in general, these are costs, right? So again, real estate purchase as plant site. So it's a lump sum, right? And because it's a lump sum, meron ring mga notes about demolishing the building. Since silent yung problem, because it was demolished, the underlying implication here is what it was not usable. Therefore, the whole lump sum price should be under land. Gets? And then we'll talk about the demolition. Pero the demolition, kung lump sum sa cash, then all the demolition will be land rent. But we have real estate taxes paid at the time of purchase, so that's under land. Demolishing building, land rent. Architect fee, building. Excavation cost, building. Filling and grading the land is land. Insurance and taxes during construction of the building is building, kasi construction of building. Cost of repairs, caused by a small fire. Yung small fire is an avoidable cost, or this is like, it's something that's not necessarily a normal occurrence when you construct a building. And therefore, that's an expense. Okay? So pag small fire, may mga injuries, usually that's outright expense. Interest paid during the year of which 52,000 pertain to the construction period. So you have two. So the total interest is 64,000, pero 52 out of the 64 is borrowing cost. So we split. 52,000 will be building, and then the remaining one, how much is yung remaining? $64 minus 52. So may 12,000 ka pa. The remaining interest paid should be an expense, right? So yung 64,000, you break it down. The one related to borrowing cost is capitalized to building, 52 building, 12,000 expense, right? Full payment to building contractor, building. Parking lot, land improvement. Real estate taxes paid for the current year. So if you look at this, meron kang accrued real estate taxes that you paid at the time of purchase. That is capitalizable. But the real estate after you purchased is expense, right? And then insurance proceeds. So may income ka, right? Kasi proceed. Dahil nasunugan ka, meron kang na-earn because of your insurance. And then yung demolishing, meron raw 3,500 na na-salvage. So yung 12,000 minus 3,500, right? So this should be negative to the cost because this is something you earn. So it's not part of the, it's part of the cost, but it's not added but subtracted, right? So in essence, your land is valued at 237,500, land improvement of 36,000, building of 856,000, and then your expenses would be 23,000, and your income should be 3,000. Right? So this is your final answer. So as you can see, mabilis lang siya if you really master the terms, right? So my tip is do more exercises and highlight new terms so you know how to treat them in the future. But in essence, ganun lang naman yung classification of your PPE types. Now, we go to subsequent recognition. So in essence, again, we initially recognize PPE at cost, right? And then eventually, we measure them subsequently at net PPE, which is again, cost minus act impairment minus act debt, right? So we're not gonna be focusing on impairment for 99.1, but this is part of theory that PPE should never be carried at more than recoverable value. Again, PPE should never be carried at more than recoverable value. And then, pero the bulk of this is that net PPE is in essence cost minus act debt is equal to your net PPE, and your net PPE is your carrying amount. And then, in order to arrive with your accumulated depreciation, which is just basically the sum of all of your depreciation expenses from the start of the purchase all the way until the end, we need to be able to master the different types of depreciation, particularly straight line, declining balance, and units of activity, right? So the very first thing is, okay, let's start simple. Let's master the basics. No complications muna. And the perfect example for this is the Freeman transportation. Sa Freeman, it gave you 3 buses. Each bus has a different depreciation method. Each bus has different terms of depreciation. And the thing that I want you to do for Freeman is 2 things. Please, I want you to master the shortcut way of solving, particularly for straight line. There's a shortcut way of solving for straight line and units of activity. See, declining balance, it's just table format all the way. But for the 2, I want you to master the shortcut solving. I'll show you later. And then, the second is I want you to understand the depreciation table. Dapat master nyo to. So if you want to perfect PPE portion, kasi honestly, the last topic for PPE is mineral resources. It's the same. Ang magkakaiba lang is depletion, hindi depreciation. But for you to master PPE, if you want to get a perfect, depreciation is the one thing you have to master. So please message me on Facebook, comment on YouTube kung hindi nyo gets how to depreciate, right? There are a lot of references, but super helpful si Weigand, si Valix on depreciation, right? So first, let's talk about straight line depreciation. For straight line, basically the idea here is step 1, you need to get your depreciable amount, which is just basically cost minus salvage value. Now that you have that depreciable amount, you need to allocate that cost year in and year out. So usually, you divide it by useful life in terms of years. And then you will arrive with your annual depreciation expense. Now, the annual depreciation expense, swerte ka if the purchase was January. Meaning, hindi mo na kailangan i-prorate. But please be careful if it's a mid-year purchase. There was an example na in the previous lecture of a mid-year purchase. So, I expect na you understand how it would be different. But for this particular exercise, we're lucky. It's not a mid-year difference. But what I will show you is the shortcut method first and then the table method. The shortcut method is this. First, identify the cost, which is 96,000. Next, what was the RV given or residual value? 6,000. So we know that the depreciable amount is 90,000. Now, what are the other terms given? The useful life was 5 years. It was purchased January, so it's not a mid-year purchase. It's not. If it's not, we're lucky. Madali lang. Right? So if it's not, so first year, 12 months. Sa last year, 12 months. Right? So with that, we can arrive with the formula. Let's plug in the depreciable amount of 90,000, divide mo by 5, you will get your annual depreciation of 18. Now, the given or the required was, what is the ACTEP for December 2020 if today is January 1, 2018? So now, we know that number 1, we have an annual depreciation of 18,000. The shortcut method is count the number of periods that have passed. 2018, 2019, 2020, 3 years. So 3 times the annual depreciation will be 54,000 of accumulated depreciation. So if tinanong sa inyo, what is the carrying amount at December 2020? Then it's just basically cost, which is 96,000, right? Minus ACDEP of 54,000. So my carrying amount is 42,000. So this is the table format. So I already showed you. But things to note, this is easy because it's not a mid-year purchase. So as you can see, your depreciation expense is literally the same year in, year out. It's 18,000 kasi walang putol, right? Walang putol. January to January, January to January. So 18,000 yung DEPRECIATE. Second, look at this, 90,000 yung end ng ACDEP nyo at the end of the useful life, which is the same as your depreciable amount. And the 6,000 carrying amount is the same as your residual value. Because residual value is the value at the end of useful life, right? So these are your 2 check figures. Every time you make a depreciation table, regardless kung straight line, regardless kung declining balance, regardless kung units of activity, yung ACDEP at the end of the useful life should equal the depreciable amount, and the carrying amount at the end of the useful life should be equal to your salvage value, regardless of the method. Okay? Next. So, let's go to boss 2. Si boss 2, declining balance. And sa declining balance, paano ulit tayo mag-solve? Unlike straight line where you want to get your annual depreciation expense, si declining balance, you want to get your DBR or your declining balance rate, which is N times 1 over useful life in years. So N, okay, sa lahat ng exercises na binigay namin, double declining palagi because it's the most common. So kaya to 2. Pero hindi ko alam kung sa quiz, hindi ko alam kung sa exam, ibigay sa inyo 150% declining balance or 180%. So kung 150, it's 1.5. Pag 170, 1.7. If it's 330, 3.3. Okay? So your N changes. But nagkataon lang that in all of the exercises, it's always double declining. So kaya 2. Then over the useful life. And then, to get your depreciation expense for the year, you get carrying amount times DBR or declining balance rate to get your annual depreciation expense. So let's solve. Your cost for boss 2 is 140,000. Your RV is 10,000. So your depreciable amount is 130,000. Your useful life is 4 years. That was purchased January 2018. So again, swerte tayo. Swerte kasi hindi mid-year purchase. Kung hindi yan mid-year purchase, you can expect all of your DBRs to be at 50%. Right? Kasi first year niya is 12 months. So next step, let us solve for the DBR. So 1/4 times 2. Bakit 2? Dahil double declining. Again, pag 150%, this should be 1.5. But 2 times 1/4 is 50%. And therefore, now that we have our DBR, we can make our table. So we start with the carrying amount of 140,000 times 50% DBR will give us a depreciation expense of 70,000. ACDEP will be 70. And it will give you your new carrying amount of 70,000. 70,000 times the DBR will give you a debt expense for the second year of 35. And then ultimately, give you a carrying amount of 35,000. Last, 35,000 times 50% give you your debt expense for third year of 17,500. And that finally, if you add all three, 70 plus 35 plus 17.5, you will get an ACDEP for the third year of 122,500. And then lastly, napansin natin na okay, after year 3, ang carrying amount natin is 17,500, which is very close to your salvage value. And therefore, instead of applying 50% DBR, we want to force this to be 10,000. And therefore, 10,000 minus 17,500, you will get a depreciation expense of 7,500, which will, at the end, will give you an ACDEP of 130,000, which looks familiar because that 130,000 is your depreciable amount. Yung 10,000 na ito is the residual value of 10,000. And then again, so ano yung mga common mistakes? Common mistakes for declining balance is itong carrying amount at the start, ang ginagamit nila is the depreciable amount. Wrong. Wala tayong pake sa depreciable amount sa declining balance. Wala tayong pake sa depreciable amount sa declining balance. What you multiply at the start would be the carrying amount, 140 at cost talaga. Okay? So that's the most common. Pero regardless, kahit wala tayong pake sa depreciable amount, through magic, because of we force this, the ACDEP of 130 at the end of the useful life will still be equal to the depreciable amount. And the carrying amount of 10,000 will be equal to the residual value of 10,000. Right? So last, units of activity. So units of activity, how do you solve for it? Basically, you want to get your DPU by dividing your depreciable amount by your units of activity, be it in machines, hours, units, time, etc., etc. And then you just multiply the units times the DPU to get your depreciation expense for that particular period. So units of activity, may shortcut trend. So step 1, what's your cost? The cost of bus 3 is 92,000 with the residual value of 8,000. That gives you your depreciable amount of 84,000. And then yung useful life mo is in miles, 120,000 in miles. So your depreciable amount is 84,000 divided by 120,000 in miles gives you a DPU of 0.70. Now, what's the shortcut to get the ACDEP for 2020? You total the number of miles from the purchase all the way to December 2020. So now that we know that our DPU is 0.70 times 60,000 miles, which is basically the 2 years worth of miles from the 2019 and 2020, it will give you an ACDEP of 42,000. And then if ang extension ng problem is what's the carrying amount in December 2020, it's just basically 92,000 minus 42,000 and the carrying amount is 50,000. So this is the table format, and as you can see, ang pinagkaiba lang is that our depreciation expense is just basically 0.70 times the unit of activity. So miles to. So 24 times 0.70 is 16,800. 36 times 0.70 is 25,200, etc., etc. But regardless, At the end of the useful life, you'll have 84,000 ACDEP, which is equal to the depreciable amount, and the 8,000 carrying amount is the residual value. So that's the first requirement, right? Which is basically what is the ACDEP based on different methods. So now we move on to the second complication in the same problem. Let's add one layer of complexity now that we've reviewed the basics. What if mid-year purchase? And honestly, matakot kayo pag may mid-year purchase kapag straight line or double declining. Kasi silang dalawa lang naman yung may effect. So after this, please revisit the discussion about mid-year purchases. Please make sure na alam nyo yung difference. Pag mid-year yung purchase or if it's January purchase. Right? But in this particular exercise, it had a scenario na if Boss 2 was purchased on April 1, what is the depreciation expense for 2018 and 2019? So ito na yung given, pero ang difference is that it was purchased on April 2018 and it's a double declining. And therefore, if it was purchased in April, in the first year, hindi na 12 months yung i-account nating depreciation expense, but the depreciation from April all the way to December. And that's how many months? April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November, December. 9 months. Another way is January, February, March. That's 3 months. So 12 minus 3, 9 months, right? So for the first year, we have to account for 9 months worth of depreciation. So for the DBR, for this year, hindi yan 50%. It will have a special DBR of 9/12 times 50%. And therefore, for that particular year, 2018, it's gonna be 50% times 9/12. We're looking at a 37.5% DBR. Or 38%, right? Naka-round up. Which will give you a depreciation expense of 52,500. And then your ACDEP is 52,500. So your new carrying amount for 2019 is 87,500. And then since whole year na yan, January 2019 to December 2019, the DBR will be 50% na. So normal na ulit. So 43,750. For the next year, still the same. And then yung carrying amount mo of 21,000 is almost close to 10,000. So at the last year of double declining, what's the special thing we do? We never multiply the DBR at the last year. Instead, we force to bring out the salvage value. And therefore, your debt expense is 11,000 because that's 10,000 minus 21,875 is 11,875. So your ACDEP is still 130,000 and 10,000. So ano yung tanong? What is the debt expense for 2018 and 2019? Well, itong dalawa lang, right? But again, pag mid-year purchase, you prorate the annual DBR. So yung annual DBR is 50%. So 9 months lang yung kailangan natin. So 50% times 9/12, right? So that basically ends the first one, right? So any questions for 10.2? I hope very clear. If not, please comment on Facebook, please comment on YouTube. So let's take a look at another example. So ito, machines naman. And for this, honestly, it's the same. But let's break down this long problem into 2 sub-problems. The first sub-problem is about machine A. And honestly, machine A is just easy. Classification lang naman yan and journal entry. For this, maraming terms. But again, pag equipment, ano yung major problem? Do you capitalize or you expense? So let's just do the analysis. Capitalize or expense for equipments. Cash price, capitalize. Sales tax, capitalize. Shipping cost, capitalize. Insurance during shipping, dahil during siya, capitalize. Installation and testing costs, capitalize. Okay. Oil and lubricants. That seems to be an additional expenditure. Does it maintain or does it improve the equipment? More of maintenance. Therefore, it's expense. Thus, 37,500 is equipment with an expense of 100. So equipment is 37,500. So our journal entry here is debit equipment 37,500, debit repair expense of 100, pero we had a cash outlay of 37,600. Now that we know the cost of 37,500, we look at the residual value. Ano raw yung residual? 5,000. Therefore, our depreciable amount is 32,500. We have a 5-year useful life, and the purchase date is when? January. Okay. So, kung purchase date is January, swerte tayo. It's not a mid-year purchase. So, please look at purchase dates, right? So, since purchase date, 12 months, 12 months. So, how do we solve for annual depreciation? Depreciable amount of 32,500 divided by useful life of 5 years. You have an annual depreciation of 6,500. And therefore, straightforward, DEPX, debit, credit act dep of 6,500. Right? So we're done with sub-problem 1. Tapos na si machine A. Okay. Let's move on to the second problem. Machine B is just depreciation. Not same yung given, iba lang yung mga methods. So basically, we just get the cost, so to get the depreciable amount, then get the useful life. We're lucky because it's January. So therefore, pag straight line, what are the things that you need to do? Get the depreciable amount, 75,000. Divide by useful life of 4 years. You get annual depreciation of 18,750. And then, ano yung expectation ko for this? Na pare-pareho lang yung depreciation expense for the next 4 years. And then I'll be able to solve, right? And then at the end, my act dep will be equal to your depreciable amount and your salvage value. So double declining, how do you solve for it? Dahil double, we start with 2, right? Times 1/4, you get 50%. And then since January yung purchase, you just multiply the DBR through your carrying amounts all the way until malapit na siya sa salvage value. The 10,000 is almost near the 5,000 salvage value. And therefore, at the last row or the last period for our DBR, we don't apply the 50%. Instead, we force the carrying amount to be equal to your salvage value. So 5,000 minus 10,000 is equal to your depreciation expense of 5,000 to get your act dep of 75,000. So again, 75,000 is equal to your depreciable amount, and then yung 5,000 equal to your residual value. The reason why pinapaulit-ulit ko sa inyo to is because that's the only way for you to check kung tama the way you depreciate. If your act dep at the end of the useful life is equal to your depreciable amount and the carrying amount is equal to your residual value, then you can be confident na tama yung depreciation table niyo. Units of activity, how do we do it again? With 125,000 units of activity, you get the depreciable amount of 75,000. Divide mo by 125,000. You get your depreciation per unit, of 0.60. And then you look at the hours. So 42,000 times 6.60, you'll get your DEPX. 37 times 0.60 is 22,200 in DEPX. 28,000 times 0.60 is 16,800. 18,000 units, 0.60, 10,800. So nakuha nyo na kagad yung depreciation expense nyo. And then you can solve. And then at the end, you'll be able to double check na, okay, tama. Kasi 75,000 si act dep and 5,000 si carrying amount. So these are a summary or table, but this is what I want to prove. That regardless of the method, it will have the same at the end of the useful life in terms of the total act dep. The total act dep at the end of the useful life should be equal to your depreciable amount. And that the carrying amount at the end of the useful life should be equal to the residual value of 5,000. And then nagkakaiba lang sila sa depreciation expense. So in essence, the different depreciation methods is just different methods of allocating that expense on year. Sa straight line, they believe that you should allocate evenly. Sa double declining, they believe that you should allocate more at the start and then unti-unti nag-gradual bumababa yung depreciation. Sa units of activity, they believe that should not be a basis of time, but it should be a basis of activity. So depende kung how much you use the activity, right? Kaya nag-iiba-iba yung depreciation. Right? So we're done. So actually, that's 2 down for depreciation. The last one na mahirap and the last layer of complexity for depreciation is the revision of estimate. And honestly, I don't know if you echo the same sentiment. Ang pinakamahirap na exercise nito is yung revision, right? So how do we solve? So what if a company changes its depreciation? Theory muna tayo. Huwag kayong kabahan. Every time there's an adjustment, you have to determine your carrying amount and your remaining useful life. And then from there, you just solve using the new assumptions. So ang pinakamahirap na exercise for that particular quiz set. And if I were to parang give you a heads up, if notes receivable yung pamatay sa receivables and bank recon is yung pamatay for cash, ang pamatay sa inyo sa PPE is depreciation. Now, in depreciation, ang pinakapamatay na topic is revision of estimates. Malilito kayo dito if hindi kayo magaling mag-depreciate. So, my suggestion is, be honest with yourself. Right? Kung hindi kayo magaling sa depreciation, tapos may nakita kayong revision at the middle, just give up on that item. Pero syempre, we don't want that, right? We want to be perfect. So, ito rin yung litmus test nyo. Conversely, if sobrang gets nyo yung revision of depreciation, then you can be confident na, okay, with depreciation, mamaniin ko lang to. Right? So, the Manson group, I want you to review it again and again until it makes sense. Right? Try to find more revision exercise. I think sa Balix meron, parang revision of estimates. Really think that would be a good way for you to double check kung gets nyo talaga. So, how do we solve this? So, I'll try to solve it my own way. Hopefully, it will demystify revision for you. And my tip for you is, you make a timeline. So, basically, make a timeline year on year. So, let's start with, okay, so it begins in 2018. So, we have 2018. We have an equipment costing 80,000. So, sorry, I just used dollars, right? So, dollars. And then, it estimates na may useful life raw of 6 years. So, alam na natin na 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, and 2023. 6 years. And then, the last is may residual value raw of 8,000. Next info. During 2020, nag-revise raw sila ng expectation. And because nag-revise, puputulin natin yung timeline. Therefore, ano na yung bago? Same pa rin yung cost, pero same pa rin yung residual value, pero ang nag-iba is yung 7 years. So meaning, hindi 7 remaining years, pero 7 total years. So instead of 2023 mag-end, we need to add 1 more year. So kailangan may 2024. And then the last phrase would be, during 2023, so ito 2023, nagkaroon na naman ng bagong estimate. So naputol na naman si timeline with the second adjustment. And then, ano yung iba ng estimate? So same pa rin si cost, pero yung residual value changed to 4,400. And then still 7 years. So, ito na yung nagbago. Right? So now that we have the timeline, it makes our strategy clear. May 3 parts, may 3 chunks. 2018 to 2019, we have to depreciate using this original assumption. 2020 to 2022, itong 3 years, we have to use the adjustment 1. Please be careful. Yung cost, syempre hindi na 80,000. We have to solve for a new carrying amount. And then last chunk would be 2023 to 2024 using the new adjustment. Right? Pero I just wanted to show you na in terms of the timeline, you can segment it into 3 chunks. Original assumption, adjustment 1, and adjustment 2. And then, dahil may change in estimate, every time may change in estimate, we need to find out ano yung carrying amount nung December 2019 kasi ito yung ipa-plug in natin to the cost. And then, we know that the remaining useful life is 5 years. Why 5 years? Initially 4 years because 6 years minus 2 years. Pero now, how many more years from 2020? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 yung remaining useful life. And then, in the second break, kailangan rin natin malaman yung carrying amount ng December 2022 with the remaining useful life of 2 years. So basically, ito yung itsura ng table natin. Normal table pero may dalawang breaks. Revision adjustment 1 and adjustment 2. So we solve normally. Yung 80,000 na cost, residual value of 8,000. So we have a depreciable amount of 72,000. Our useful life is still 6 years during the original assumption. So straightforward na 72,000 depreciable amount divided by 6 years is equal to 12,000 annual depreciation. So I can expect na 2018 and 2019 will have 12,000 in annual depreciation. So if I plug it in, I will now have a carrying amount at the end of 2019 of 56,000. And then sakto, dito nag-stop or dito nag-unang nag-break. Come next year, nag-iba raw yung estimate. May adjustment 1 na tayo. The new cost is what? The carrying amount at the end of 2019, which is 56,000. So 56,000 na to. Our residual value remains the same at 8,000. So now it gives us a new depreciable amount of 48,000. And now, yung remaining years is instead of 4, naging 5. Because total years is 7 na. So 7 minus the 2 years in 2018 and 2019, we have a remaining useful life of 5. Therefore, our annual depreciation is 9,600. And my expectation is 9,600 to, 9,600 to, and 9,600 to. So we carry over the 56,000, subtract 9,600, then for the next 3 years, have depreciation expense of 9,600. And then now you'll have 27,200. And then, hati na naman ulit sa timeline. Meron na naman tayong new estimate, which is the revised salvage value. So step 4, depreciate using the last adjustment. So the cost will now be 27,200, which is the carrying amount. Yung residual value natin from 8,000, ginawang 4,400. So now we have a new depreciable amount at 22,800. And our remaining useful life, out of the 7 years, 2 years na lang yung natira. Right? So since 2 years na lang natira, we can now compute for your annual depreciation for the last chunk of 22,800 divided by 2, 11,400. So 11,400 to, 11,400 to, which gives us 4,400. That is the salvage value. And then ito 75,600, hindi na siya nag-equal sa depreciable amount because this one, depreciable amount, refers to the 2 years na lang when in fact this ACDEP refers naman to the whole depreciable amount for the 7 years, right? So that ends depreciation. I think there's this one more exercise na more of journal entries. I leave it up to you. I will upload it sa answer key. The last one will be for the disposal, right? So we're done now with initial recognition. We're done with subsequent recognition. The last is disposal. For disposal, again, it looks hard because puro compound entries. But in essence, dalawa lang naman palagi mong gagawin. You update the depreciation. So if it's a mid-year retirement or a mid-year disposal, please update your depreciation. Yun yung palagi mo makakalimutan that will cost you for this item. Kuwari, sasabihin sa'yo, ACDEP of the equipment is 30,000 at the end of 2019. The equipment was sold September 2020. Usually, isusubtract mo lang yung ACDEP kaagad. That's wrong. Please update your depreciation. Now, you need to account for the depreciation from January 1, 2020 all the way to September 2020. Bago mo i-compute yung journal entry na gagawin natin. So please, wag tayong mechanical in terms of like the journal entries. Alam ko there's a pattern. I've always been upfront naman about the pattern. Madali lang siya. Pero please, wag niyong kakalimutan to update your depreciation. So again, there are 3 kinds. You have your retirement, your sale and exchange. Usually it's gain or loss in sale and gain and loss in exchange na lalabas, right? But in essence, be it a sale or retirement, pare-pareho lang yan. You just have to master how to write a journal entry. So let's look at a simple example and master the format. So we have yount towing. So si yount towing, tatlo yung scenarios. But honestly, even if it's 3 different scenarios, the way we will solve for it will always be the same. Step 1, so scenario A, no value. Step 1, credit the PPE original cost, which is 50,000. Step 2, debit the cash proceeds. Well, since no value, walang cash proceeds, so 0. Debit the ACDEP, so 22,000. Okay, pause. Yung ACDEP naman na to, updated, well, wala naman silang sinabi. So we assume na ito na yung ACDEP for the point of sale. So 22,000. So may difference ba? Yes, malaki. The difference is a debit of 28,000, which would be a loss on disposal. So we're done with A. Easy. B, different scenario, it was sold for 25,000, but the same, we're gonna be journal entering the same. Step 1, credit the PPE at original cost, which is 50,000. Step 2, debit cash proceed. Ito ngayon meron tayo. 25,000. ACDEP of 22,000. So now, ano yung difference? May kulang pa tayo na debit of 3,000. And if it's debit, it's a loss. If it's a debit, it's an expense. Therefore, if it's an expense, it's a loss on disposal. Last, scenario C. It was sold for 31,000. So again, ano yung format? Paulit-ulit, paulit-ulit, right? Credit PPE at original cost, 50,000. Debit cash proceeds of 31,000. Debit ACDEP of 22,000. Sana yung may kulang sa credit side of 3,000. Credit revenue. Credit gain on sale. Right? So credit 3,000. So 3 scenarios looks different, but the way we journal entry is the same. Right? So ano yung ulit yung steps? Step 0, update depreciation. Step 1, credit PPE original cost. Step 2, debit your cash. Step 3, debit your ACDEP. And then step 4, determine gain or loss depending on which debit or credit yung may kulang. So we're done with young towing. So the last one is exchange. And the only difference lang sa exchange is you need to know how to get the cost of your new PPE, which is just basically the fair value of your old PPE plus yung cash paid. Right? So, aside from updating your depreciation, you also need to solve for the cost of your new PPE. So, let's master the format. And in order to do that, we have the Global and Riho LTD. Let's look at Global muna. So, step 1, pag-exchange, we'll solve for the cost of your new PPE. So let's look at the fair value of the old truck of 37,400. The cash proceed or the cash na we received is 17,000. So 37,400 plus 17,000 is 54,400. How do we write the compound journal entry for exchange? There's a format. Number 1, debit the new PPE cost. Nakakasolve lang natin ng 54,400. Credit the cash proceed of 17,000, which is part of the computation. Credit our old PPE at cost. So the cost is 64,000. And then may ACDEP tayo na i-debit natin of 22,000. Now, if you compare, hindi ito nagbabalance right now. There is a debit missing, which is 4,600 worth. In that debit, dahil debit, expense. Dahil debit, loss. Loss on disposal of 4,600. Si Riho, same format. First step, what is the cost of the new PPE? FV of old PPE is 9,000 plus the cash proceed of 3,200. So your cost of new PPE is 12,200. Ano ulit yung format natin? Debit new PPE cost of 12,200. Credit a cash proceed of 3,200. Credit the old PPE at cost of 12,000. Debit act debt of 4,000. And then merong kulang na credit of 1,000. Dahil credit yung nawawala, that's a gain on disposal or revenue, right? Revenue. So basically that's it, right? Sobrang dali. Straightforward si exchange. The last topic is, what if may exchange na may commercial substance but there's no cash exchange? And that's basically the example of J and si Astro. Literally nag-exchange sila. Si J binigay yung equipment niya kay Astro, si Astro binigay yung equipment niya kay J. Ito, it's literally the same. You have similar journal entries with the same process, and then we're just gonna look into it, right? So look at the given and then plug and play lang, right? Step 1, we need to debit the new PPE cost. Since there are no cash proceed, the new PPE cost will be the fair value of what you receive. From the J's perspective, the fair value or the cost of the new equipment would be the fair value that they receive, which is the fair value of the Astro equipment. So 4,000. Si Astro naman, it would be the fair value of the J equipment of 4,000. So it makes sense. Si Astro nakatanggap ng 4,000, si J nakatanggap ng 4,000. Kaya siya exchange, right? Step 2, credit the cash proceed. Well, walang cash proceed, so 0. Step 3, credit the old PPE cost. Ano yung old PPE kay J? 22,000. Ano yung old PPE kay Astro? 10,000. Debit act debt, yung 4th step. Ano yung act debt nung 22,000 na truck ni J? 16,000. Ano yung act debt nung truck ni Astro? 7,000. So in their two journal entries, may butas. Kay J, there is a missing debit of 2,000. Dahil debit siya, that's a loss on disposal. Dahil debit, that's an expense. Si Astro, there's a missing credit of 1,000. Dahil credit siya, it's a revenue. Therefore, that's a gain on disposal. So actually, we're done na rin with exchange. And then by doing that, we're able to present it now into our financial statements at net of PPE. And then as you can see, ito yung mga different computations. So very straightforward the exercises. I think I was able to finish discussing within an hour. But please, madali lang to in terms of like the overview on how to solve. Pero the real challenge for you is, number 1, di kayo nasusuka in computing for depreciation. Para siyang notes receivable, daming procedures, madali siya gawin sa template sa Excel. Pero sa finals, I believe you, trust me, sasakit ulo nyo. Right? So ngayon pa lang, let's master na gets natin strategically how to solve for it. But then let's solve for it, man. So that ends our exercise discussion. Hopefully this uploads by 12. Don't worry kung nag-upload siya earlier. I will check yung mga attempts. Basically, if, syempre, kasi parang the easiest na lang is just copy the right answer I'm gonna be telling you. So, if ever it uploads earlier, then basically parang I'll just make sure na perfect na lang everyone that submitted by like around 10:90, right? So basically that's it. Good luck everyone. Don't forget you have your quiz on Monday. Last 2 quizzes na lang. So let's finish strong and then let's enjoy the Christmas break. In our next live session, I'll share with you the strategy kung paano tayo magkakaroon ng stress-free holidays in preparation for your finals. Yeah. So have a great night. Goodbye.